All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Unit 17, otherwise known as Religion and Science. So, obviously, we're going to focus on religion and science in this unit, but we're also going to take a look at the political and economic power structure in Western Europe that leads to these revolutions in religion, science, political, philosophical thinking, right? So in terms of the recommended supplemental viewing, I'm gonna have to say that Crash Course 218 is gonna kind of be a must watch for this unit. It deals with Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, not only from the a viewpoint of a religious angle, but also how this generates political revolution within Western Europe as well. Crash Course 219 is going to be helpful. It deals with the life of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. Not so much because you need to know everything there is to know about Charles V, but because it does a good job of tying the last 3 units or so together, big picture wise. You got to remember that in this class, even though we try to address things somewhat topically and chronologically, that the colonization of the Americas, the globalization of trade, and these revolutions within science and religion are all happening essentially simultaneously, that they are intertwined, that they cause and affect one another, and that they, even though we address them in different units, that you can't separate the things from one another. Now, for the rest of the supplemental viewing, um, the Versailles tour is pretty interesting, not only because you get to see the palace, which is one of the most ostentatious buildings in Western Europe and all of the world, but also because it talks about how the building of the palace represented the wielding of this absolute power that the kings of Western Europe were able to hold for several centuries during the early modern era. Also, you have the Khan Academy stuff, which is excellent for filling in a lot of the details. And then down at the bottom, when we get to kind of Eurocentric topics like this unit, you're going to see that I'm going to recommend this AP Euro bit by bit series because I feel like this guy does a really excellent job. So I really recommend, check out his playlist on YouTube. He hits on a lot of really excellent topics, covers them in pretty good detail. All right, so still feeling sick. I'm gonna try to get through this with as little like coughing and holdup as possible. So y'all are gonna have to bear with me. So we're gonna rewind a little bit here, and we're gonna look at the political structure in Western Europe. Now, as we have already talked about, after the Crusades, there is a slow and steady breakdown of the system of feudalism in Western Europe. As nobles go off to war, as princes and their eldest sons go off to fight in the Holy Land, this leaves the manor system in Europe relatively unmanaged. And after the Crusades, many of the poor and the working class begin to break out of their feudal contracts. They begin moving to cities and establishing, legitimate businesses. They begin banking. They begin um, basically abandoning the feudal manners that they had lived on for generations. This helps to empower the monarchs of Europe. They're able to consolidate the lands of either dead or bankrupt nobles. Urbanization helps to give them a larger tax base. It helps make tax collection more efficient, not only because the people are consolidated into, you know, the cities and smaller areas, but also because it begins to cut out the middlemen of tax collection, which were these lords that were collecting taxes directly from their peasants and then paying it up the ladder. So, across the board in the 13th, 14th century, royal power begins to increase, and you start to see some of the familiar large nation states in Europe take shape: Spain, Portugal, England, and especially France. And with a greater tax base and more efficient tax collection, their royal treasuries and their armies begin to grow. This empowers them even more, and they start to develop very efficient bureaucracies. Now, with this increase in royal power, this brings several of these large states in Western Europe into conflict with the ultimate authority in Western Europe for the past 800 years, which is the Roman Catholic Church. Essentially, since the end of the Western Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church was the final authority not only in religious matters, but also in social matters, cultural matters, and even in politics. They would throw religious support, financial support, in some cases, even military support behind kings and heads of states who are willing to support their supremacy and their interests. So, as France and Spain and these other nation states grow more powerful, they begin butting heads with the Roman Catholic Church, mostly over taxation of church lands and church income, but also over issues like lay investiture, where the Roman Catholic Church would oftentimes demand that they were the only authority when it came to appointing religious leaders within these nation states: bishops, cardinals, all the way down to parish priests. And basically, what they did is they challenged the authority of these kings by saying, listen, we do not recognize the validity of any, religious leaders or clergymen that you try to appoint on your end. They must be appointed by us. And this was this was a topic of a lot of contention because the church owned quite a bit of land and was able to generate quite a bit of wealth based on that land. So naturally, heads of state, kings, would want bishops and cardinals and priests that are loyal to them in these very important positions within their territory. And so this, lay investiture controversy goes back and forth for several centuries. For the most part, these states are able to settle their differences with the Roman Catholic Church non-violently, but in some cases, these conflicts do become violent. Spain and France both invade Rome more than once. This causes the Roman Catholic Church to militarize itself. It begins to acquire land around Rome as well as other Italian city states. They establish a papal army. They take advantage of religious orders like the Templars and the Knights of Teuton to help serve as a military wing of the Roman Catholic Church. But even through all of this, even through the militarization of the Roman Catholic Church, by the 15th century, most of these larger states and these larger kingdoms in Western Europe have, for the most part, become almost independent of papal authority. They still pay homage to the Roman Catholic Church because it is the religious authority. It is the sole source of, Christianity in Western Europe, but politically they have established themselves as independent from the decisions coming from Rome and the Pope. So, this growing power of kings and secular rulers expresses itself in the political ideology known as absolutism. And as you can tell by the base word absolute, this is the belief that a ruler holds total godlike power within his lands, that he has essentially the power of life and death, that he can simply speak law into being, that he can speak um, life and death into being, right? And the most lasting expression of this absolute power is expressed by James VI of Scotland in a series of writings that where he acknowledges what he calls the divine right of kings. The idea that these monarchs and their families are handpicked by God himself. And if they are handpicked by God himself, they are answerable only to God, that they don't need to justify their actions or their power to any worldly authority. The Pope, their people, their nobles, their army, that essentially their word is law. Now, we've seen quite a few religious justifications of power up to this point in this class. And the divine right of kings is similar to those in a lot of ways. However, unlike, say, the mandate of heaven or the religious justification of early classical empires, this idea of the divine right of kings is different in that it is born into these royal families, that it is imbued by birth, and therefore it cannot be lost. That by giving this family the right to rule, um, God has said that they do not need to answer to anyone but Him. And the idea that they could be challenged or that this divine right could be lost in the way that the mandate of heaven could be lost by Chinese emperors is just simply not, it's not part of this political ideology. In China, if a ruler mismanaged the country or abused their power, then the mandate of heaven could be lost, and the people had the right to overthrow that dynasty and establish a new one that would manage would manage power correctly. Under the divine right of kings, this is not a possibility. Only God could remove these people from power, not the Pope, not their own people, nothing. Okay. Now, the discovery and the colonization of the Americas not only enhances this belief that God has divinely chosen these people to rule over vast lands and vast colonies, but the tax revenues that flow into um, these kingdoms further empowers them and enlarges their authority. It gives them the power to purchase more troops, to establish a larger bureaucracy, to better manage tax collection, to purchase spies and police networks to enhance their authority and to silence their opposition. And a lot of these rulers use this influx of revenue to assert complete and total control over their land, their people, and over religious authorities like the Roman Catholic Church. Probably the best example of this is Louis XIV of France. He becomes the figurehead of absolute power. The estate that he builds at Versailles outside of Paris also becomes the ultimate symbol of royal authority and absolute power.